welcome to Inside AI, the podcast where we bring you unfiltered insights from people who are shaping AI agendas that matter. My name's Jan Esman. I'm the head of strategy for CTO Consulting Group, and our guest today is Dale Rogers. He's a service designer and a business liaison working across digital transformation and ICT governance at the Australian Government Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment and Water. Almost got that right. I'd like to open by saying that the views that you're going to hear today are expressly our own and do not reflect agencies or organizations. So this is very much Jan and Dale. But I think we've got to have a good conversation because we are working at the coalface, and I think there's some really great ideas we can bring into this conversation. So what is it about? It's about Swiss cheese. And I think this is a fabulous metaphor because the idea of Swiss cheese is that each slice has got holes in it. And when you set them up, you can either get a solid piece of cheese, or if the holes line up, you have a direct pathway all the way through the cheese. And that becomes that risk failure mode, which creates the unexpected catastrophes. And we all know that large-scale infrastructure projects, resource extraction projects, have been dealing with large-scale risk for a long time in a ways that IT hasn't always had to deal with. We've never really managed risk on the scale of AI before, but we can learn a lot from what those kinds of organizations have done to cope with some of the major disasters, the Deepwater Horizon, the Piper Alpha. They've had big failures, and we really don't want big failures in AI. So that's really the concept behind why we're having this conversation. So let's do a little bit of an opening starter. Dale, what do you see how organizations are approaching their AI governance right now, and what kind of patterns are emerging around this risk management?
I think the most common patterns around risk management are around alignment and guardrails. And, there's a real need to sort of align to ethics reviews and responsible AI frameworks, model fine-tuning. But I think, that's only one slice of the Swiss cheese. It's not a governance system. And so I think what's really absent in the conversation about AI risk is the operational controls, the things that actually stop or contain a bad outcome in real time, regardless of whether the model is aligned or not. And I think the maturity just isn't there. But the confidence is. I think people feel like, we're starting to get this alignment thing solved. So it provides a false sense of security.
As part of that transition from, we historically think of an ICT project, get the requirements, build it, test it, deploy it, run and operate it. Whereas with an AI, what we're really doing is engaging in an ongoing development, learning, training, exception management, continuing governance. Is that part of the change in mindset around these risks?
Yeah, I think so. I think that change in the sort of mode of continuous operation, and also in large part the non-determinacy of AI means that sometimes the outcomes aren't exactly what we expect, and also the failure modes and the testing. It's not as easy to script.
Yeah. Now tell me, is it as simple as writing a policy? I mean, is that the answer? We just need to have a policy for AI.
Look, I wish it was. No, it's not as simple as writing a policy. There's a lot of moving parts that need to be put together. The policies are important. The ethics.
Do you think a policy risks putting the brakes on too early? Is there a risk that before we even really understand how we're going to apply AI into government scenarios, we're throwing controls and policy at it too early? Or should we be doing something around that framing?
I think we definitely should be doing We should have policies and we should have alignment. Um, I guess what's missing though um, it is the operational context. The controls that actually enacts the policy. Um, Policies are only as good as the controls that are in place.
Yeah, really important, isn't it? I mean, it's almost like the policy is the reflection of a mature set of governance and controls rather than I'm going to write a policy and hope that the maturity comes out of the policy. Let's talk about the Swiss cheese because I love the metaphor. I really want to see if we can work that one through from an AI. So what are the layers in the Swiss cheese model for AI?
We discussed already, policy. We talked about alignment. They're two separate layers. We then need to start to think about training and human in the loop reviews. We want to have in place output filtering and hooks that
Yeah.
detect aberrant output. Um, and so at each layer of defence, we need to sort of be able to catch different aspects of a error that might be propagating through the system.
Yeah, no, that's a good. Can you give an example of when the holes line up? And I think give us an example of when things go wrong. How does it happen? And give us an example of one you've seen.
Yeah, look, I think in AI, the when the holes line up, the it's not always catastrophic. Okay, it's not a really obvious disastrous failure, and it's more common that uh, that that small errors go missed, and so as parts of the human in the loop aspect of the layers of defence occur, as people become more confident and comfortable that the systems are working correctly, uh, there's less of an eye on the detail. And so, small errors can propagate through, be missed by the human, and we are only human. And ultimately, those errors, uh, I think the largest sort of effect is around bias, right? So it's these systems we're using around decision support tools. So it's AI helping assessment officers make decisions based on, licensing of a doctor or something like that. And the errors that propagate through the system mean that the output, might completely ignore a cohort of people and or completely bias or completely sort of affect a cohort of people on the output.
There's a really interesting point because I love the way you got down to an assessment for a license, something really concrete with the idea that AI can help accelerate or provide a more 360 view of the decision to allow that human in the loop to make the decision. So, but there's a really interesting insight in that AI is not going to necessarily be perfect. It might have a much lower error rate than a human being but still not perfect. And we know with self-driving cars, our standard of expectation for a sort of a electronic-driven car is so much higher than it is for a human. And
Yeah,
have you seen that kind of struggle? Like, what's an acceptable error rate for a system as opposed to a human?
I have. Yeah. So, um, we do expect much greater uh, accuracy from our automated systems, including AI. And I think it's actually reasonable to expect much greater accuracy. I think these systems can do a much better job at the expert roles that they have. But funnily enough, it's not. 100% AI, but it is machine
Yeah.
learning related.
Yeah.
But we had some. I did some work at the Royal Australian Mint, and there was some vision systems that would count coins, and um, again, those small kind of minor errors meant that over after you process 100,000 tons of dollar coins, um,
Mm.
you can be the accounting system is up or down by a percentage, and so it's really important again with these layers of defence to in put in place those tolerances around, well, you know, uh, how much plus or minus 1% is okay, or 2%, and also have a variety of different checking mechanisms. So you not just applying one approach to counting coins, but you're also passing it through a different test.
Yeah, good example. I love it. Hey, we started out by talking a little bit about how we could learn from some of those big resource infrastructure type projects. And one of those concepts that you brought up, or I see here, is that you've got a bow tie analysis. Can you talk a bit about bow tie analysis and how it might apply to AI thinking?
Yeah, so bow tie analysis is really common in petrochemical industries and high risk industries, and essentially it's the idea that we have preventative controls. So we might have a pressure relief valve um, on our boiler, but we also have on the other side um, sort of remediation controls. So coming out of the central point of the event, something went wrong. On the other side, well, okay, we didn't mean it to go wrong, but it did. And so what controls have we got in place right now to address that? And if you put that into sort of an AI context, we do have the alignment of our systems. We are designing and training our language models to, apply our morals and values and ethics. But at times, AIs do go wrong, and I'm thinking of Twitter and X, but Grok, started to sort of call itself, uh, um, Hitler
Mega
or something.
overlord.
I
Yeah.
can't remember. Yeah, mega,
That's right.
right? So when that error happens, okay, it's okay. Yep, we did all of the things we could to train to prevent that error, that alignment. But after it happened, how did we control it? How did we put the genie back in the bottle? How do we stop the error from
Yeah.
continuing?
Correct, and I like that risk mitigation. We often think about trying to understand the risks, take the threat and the consequence, and look at how we can mitigate that, but also how can we avoid those risks as well.
Yeah,
Um, how does that come together into a sort of a systems view of risk? Because it's almost like that they're almost the holes in the cheese. If I can make a list of things that can go wrong, great. I've just listed out a bunch of holes, and I can write sort of mitigations or avoidance strategies against that. But because this is a learning ongoing system, you need a system of risk management. So how do you evolve it from the Swiss whole cheese up to a system?
oh, look, I mean, I think we sort of come full loop into the policy sort of space where, you have a framework and you set expectations, you design you identify all of the risks that you imagine might be involved in the system or involved in the delivery of the large language model. And it's not very sexy, but it is about documentation. It's
Yeah.
also about testing. Uh, you know, if I do
And,
have
and I think you've really hit the point for me there around being able to have an ongoing, test. You need to be able to sample those results consistently to determine whether the model is actually veering off course or is not coping with real life, scenarios, as opposed to the theoretical scenarios that it was created with and trained on. And I think that ongoing test, evidence, reinforce and go back to the learning model, set the guide rails up, carry on and keep that process. That's a new mechanism. We haven't actually used that traditionally on technology projects.
I mean, yeah, I mean, monitoring and telemetry is a thing. I'm not sure that I think we have used it. I think, we
Yeah.
use it in industrial controls. We even use it in, the web and like Google Analytics, marketing people in particular are constantly running A/B tests. So, yeah, there is a bit of sort of knowledge out there in, in, in marketing and other disciplines to bring
Yeah.
monitoring and telemetry to the table.
Yeah, and I like that A/B thinking as well, because that is a real life. You're testing, a new scenario, a new, process pattern, and then you're being able to measure results, and then you'll be able to upgrade and evolve by constantly having a series of tests in the market. And I think that's really applicable to AI thinking, isn't it?
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, so the high hazard industries, they went through this, and did it a lot. And help me that we've actually had Geelong go and
We
sort of
have,
have a fire yesterday. I know,
yeah,
just
look
just
us
when we
up.
don't need another petrol, supply disruption. But those high hazard industries, I think there's a cultural aspect to that as well, where they actually culturally, are very conscious of it. It's discussed at every meeting, safety, risks, operational standards. Is that where we're going in terms of, I guess, AI capable business units that are supported with AI specialists?
I very much hope so. Those high risk industries were forced to take safety really seriously. They were forced to take risk really seriously because of those hyper alpha, etc. type incidents. And, uh, you know, it wasn't that the types of errors were invisible, right? It was just that people weren't looking. And
Yeah.
certainly changing culture in ICT, in AI, developing a culture of, risk averse risk management, and looking under the bed, really sort of not being afraid to sort of look for those errors that could be there.
Yeah, I think the other concept around high risk industries is that ALARP, ALARP. Can you talk us through what is ALARP and how that might be a relevant concept for AI?
Yeah, so ALARP it's really this concept that we we don't want to spend uh, inordinate amounts to control the problem. Let me stop for a moment and rephrase my ALARP is almost is about doing enough, good enough, right, and not perfection. And it's about understanding and being very
Yeah, it stands for
expensive.
as low as reasonably possible,
Reasonable.
isn't it? Which is that,
Yes.
yeah,
So
yeah,
but it's also about setting the bar, right? So I'm going to put in place all of these controls, and I'm going to give myself a bar, and I'm not going to spend more money on chasing smaller and smaller benefits.
yeah, yeah. No, that's good. That's a good kind of position to take. And again, it's that pragmatism, but it's a pragmatism built into the culture and allowing you to manage to a business outcome, an organizational outcome. Dale, what can leaders do? What should they take away from this conversation? If you were a senior manager thinking about AI program, what would you want to do to deal with some of the things we've talked about today?
Look, I think the best thing that I'd ask a senior manager to do is to think about what happens if things go wrong, and what plans have they put in place. Do they have an incident controller? Do they have pre-approved pre-approved by legal comms to go out to the media? Do they have a way to pull the plug? Do they have they authorised somebody to pull the plug? And does that person understand the threshold that they need to pull the plug at?
Yeah.
And that person, it needs to be an accountable individual. When things go wrong, you don't have time to put a committee together and decide whether or not you're going to pull the plug.
Yeah. And is that about establishing critical controls?
Yes. Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and what sort of critical controls do you think are really, high priority for AI?
I think user safety. So it's about sort of understanding the potential for harm in the communities that our solutions serve. Is our medical doctor licensing system, you know, giving licenses to people that might harm our community, and if we can identify that harm, those specific types of harm that can occur, then that's where we start to put in those preventative controls and those mitigating controls.
Yeah. And that creates a need for an ethical overlay. Have you seen organizations do that well?
Look, I think in the AI space, and again, you started off with this is just our personal opinion. I think we do. I think we do the preventative controls really well. I just don't think we do the mitigating controls. I don't think we apply them.
Yeah. And maybe there's a little bit of that mentality about I deploy, traditionally deployed a finance system or HR system and it just runs. But you
Yeah,
deploy an AI system and you need to keep fertilizing it, watering it, and trimming the bits that have grown off in the wrong direction. So it's an ongoing commitment. It's a cultural measurement environment. It's got controls that need to be actually actively maintained. I think that's such a good metaphor. I mean, I've personally worked in a refinery situation. I've seen what happens when they've gone for zero injuries, and
mm,
it's the halcyon goal, but the practically you won't get there, but the cultural change to think about what you can do systemically to avoid things going wrong is not a once off. It's not a set and forget. I don't just give everybody some safety equipment and good luck with that. No, it's a complete cultural commitment to ongoing attention to risks,
absolutely.
corrections, and managing that ongoing sort of service delivery. So I think it's a great
And
metaphor. I love
and
bringing a little bit of that
yeah,
alternative
and
industry
repeated
thinking.
monitoring and training and refresher training and understanding that human element of working alongside AI.
Yeah. And I think that's what we've got to get right. We talk about human in the loop. We talk about the threat that AI poses to traditional jobs, but it's that, we've got to develop a new relationship with this technology, and it will change a lot of things and a lot of expectations, but we've got to evolve quite quickly as well to take advantage of that. So I think that's a great sort of insight, Dale. It's perfect. Good. Thank you, Dale. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and look forward to having many more.
Great. Look,
Okay.
thanks for inviting me along, Jan, and yeah, really enjoy sharing my insights.
Brilliant.